What happens when a man who built an empire on power and control discovers that the one thing he cannot command is love? Clara Bennett was just a young woman desperate to save her mother's life, with nothing but determination and $47 to her name. Nathaniel Hale was a ruthless billionaire CEO, a man known for ice-cold decisions, 20-hour workdays, and a heart locked behind walls of steel. Their worlds should never have collided, yet fate placed Clara at his side as his secretary, his challenger, his mirror. But was she simply another tool in his corporate game, or the one person who could pierce his armor and reveal the man beneath the mask? Through battles of pride,
I thought I'd lost
and storms
you.
of betrayal,
Don't ever do that to me again.
Their story asks the questions we all carry deep inside. Is true strength found
Clara,
in power?
please,
Or
don't
in the
go.
courage to trust
I know I
someone
messed
with
up,
your
but let me
heart?
explain.
Can love survive
Esteemed colleagues,
ambition,
members of
fear,
the press,
and the ghosts of the
I stand
past
before you
stay
today
with
to
us?
announce my
As we
resignation.
uncover a love story built not on perfection,
I am
but on
announcing
second
my
chances
resignation.
and the bravery to begin again. If this story touches you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Now, let's begin. Clara Bennett stood on the sidewalk of Madison Avenue, clutching the strap of her worn leather bag so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The late September air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor, but Clara barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the glass tower before her 58 stories of steel and brilliance that seemed to pierce the very sky. The gleaming letters near the top spelled out Hale Dynamics, a name synonymous with innovation, wealth, and ruthless efficiency. For Clara, it represented something far more immediate: survival. At 25, she had imagined life would look different. College had been full of dreams and late-night debates about the future. She had earned her degree in business administration with a concentration in healthcare management, hoping to bridge compassion with commerce. But dreams had collided with reality. Her mother's Parkinson's diagnosis had accelerated far faster than the doctors predicted. Demanding experimental treatments, insurance would not cover. Her father, a retired firefighter with a bad back, could only do so much. The savings dwindled, then vanished. Credit cards carried balances that grew heavier each month. This morning, Clara checked her bank app before leaving her tiny Queens apartment, 5841s. That was all she had left. Not enough for rent due in 10 days. Not enough for another round of medication her mother needed next week. And then, the call had come. A placement agency, one she had nearly forgotten, told her that an unusual opportunity had opened. 6 months as an executive secretary at Hale Dynamics. A miracle or a trap. The pay was triple anything she had seen before, enough to stabilize her family's chaos, at least for a while. The catch: she would be working directly under Nathaniel Hale himself, the man whose face had appeared on the cover of Forbes and Businessweek, usually accompanied by words like relentless, brilliant, uncompromising. Whispers painted him as cold to the point of cruelty. A man who cut employees the way surgeons cut tumors quickly, cleanly, without remorse. Still, Clara had no choice. She drew a breath, catching sight of her reflection in the polished glass doors. Dark hair pulled into a neat bun, navy skirt suit, borrowed from her cousin,
I
shoes
thought I'd
scuffed
lost you.
but polished as best as
Don't
she
ever
could
do that
manage.
to me again.
Her reflection looked like a question mark standing before a world carved in marble certainty. "Okay," she whispered, one step forward, just one. The revolving doors hissed as she pushed inside, and suddenly she was standing in a lobby that seemed to belong in a movie. The floor was polished marble, creamy white with veins of gold that caught the morning light streaming through the high windows. Sculptures of brushed steel twisted toward a ceiling so high it made her dizzy. Everything gleamed, as though even dust knew better than to linger here.
Esteemed
People
colleagues,
in tailored suits
members
moved
of the
with
press,
purpose, their shoes
I stand
clicking
before you
briskly
today
against
to
the
announce
stone,
my
their
resignation.
voices low but confident. Clara adjusted her bag strap again, feeling like a child who had wandered into a cathedral of wealth. She approached the reception desk, where a woman with sleek blonde hair and a headset regarded her without smiling. Clara gave her name. The receptionist typed quickly, then nodded toward the bank of elevators. "Mrs. Preston will meet you upstairs. 42nd floor, Good luck." The way she said good luck sounded less like encouragement and more like a warning. Clara stepped into the elevator, the mirrored walls reflecting her nervous fidgeting. As the numbers climbed, her heart kept pace, pounding harder with each floor. She thought of her mother's trembling hands, her father's quiet exhaustion, the unopened bills piled on the kitchen counter. This job wasn't just a job. It was oxygen. And if she failed, the whole fragile structure of her family's life might collapse. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a hallway lined with frosted glass panels. Everything smelled faintly of citrus and antiseptic clean. Controlled, intimidating. A woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun approached. Her heels struck the floor like gavel blows. "You must be Miss Bennett," she said. Her voice was crisp, efficient, the kind of tone that tolerated no wasted syllables. "Yes, ma'am," Clara answered, forcing her voice to sound steady. "I'm Mrs. Preston. I've served Mr. Hale for nearly 20 years. Consider me both gatekeeper and shield. If you last 6 months here, you'll be a rarity." Clara's stomach nodded, but she nodded. "I'll do my best. Mrs. Preston's expression softened just a fraction. "That's what they all say. Mr. Hale is waiting." The words sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She followed Mrs. Preston down the corridor toward a set of double glass doors etched with Hale Dynamics emblem. Her legs felt strangely heavy, as though the carpet itself resisted her steps. Behind those doors waited the man who held her family's fate in his hands. She inhaled deeply, whispered a silent prayer, and prepared to step inside the lion's den. The doors opened with a whisper, and Clara stepped into an office that defied every image she had carried of corporate power. She had expected heavy mahogany furniture, leather chairs, perhaps shelves lined with books no one actually read. Instead, the room felt like the future walls of glass stretching from floor to ceiling, sunlight flooding in and washing everything in pale gold. The city stretched beneath them like a living map, rooftops, bridges, the silver thread of the Hudson shimmering far away. The furniture was sleek steel and glass, minimalist, almost surgical. A single desk stood near the windows, spotless except for a tablet, a fountain pen, and a single sheet of paper placed precisely at its center. Behind the desk sat the man himself. Nathaniel Hale did not look up. Clara's first impression was that photographs had not captured him at all. He was younger than she had imagined, 35, perhaps, but there was nothing youthful in the sharp lines of his face. Dark brown hair, thick but slightly unruly, as though he had run impatient fingers through it before dismissing the idea of combing. His jaw was clean-shaven, the muscles tight with concentration. The air in the room seemed to pause around him, as if even oxygen knew better than to interrupt. Minutes passed. Clara stood in silence, uncertain whether to clear her throat or wait until acknowledged. She could hear the faint hum of the city below, the occasional clicking of Nathaniel's finger against the tablet screen. Finally, she ventured softly, "Mr. Hale." Without lifting his gaze, he spoke. His voice was low, precise, each syllable cut like stone. "Punctuality is non-negotiable." Clara blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. "We were scheduled to begin at 9, he continued. "It is now 9:03. Heat rushed into her cheeks. Her grip on the leather strap of her bag tightened. "With respect." "Mr. Hale," she said carefully. "I arrived at 8:50. Your assistant asked me to wait in the lobby while you finished a call." That made him look up. The eyes that met hers were a startling shade of gray, not soft like morning mist, but sharp, like ice on winter pavement. They pinned her in place, assessing, calculating, as though she were a variable in some complex equation. "Mrs. Preston did not mention a call." "Then perhaps," Clara said before she could stop herself, "you should ask Mrs. Preston about her communication rather than questioning mine." The words hung in the air like glass about to shatter. Clara's heart thudded against her ribs. What had she just done? She had challenged one of the most powerful men in New York on her very first day. A part of her wanted to snatch the words back, to apologize, to retreat into silence. But another part, the part that had carried her through hospitals and overdue bills, held her spine straight. She would not shrink. Not now. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. His expression did not soften, but something flickered across it, a glimmer of interest, perhaps even amusement. "Sit," he said finally. Clara moved to the chair opposite his desk. She sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, trying not to show how her palms had grown damp. For several moments, Nathaniel simply studied her. The silence stretched, heavy but not empty. He observed her as a scientist might observe a specimen under glass, curious, detached, yet undeniably intent. "Tell me," he said at last, "why you are here." Clara blinked. "Because the placement agency sent me." "No," he said. The word clipped. "Not what brought you to the door. What compels you to step through it?" She hesitated. She had expected questions about her resume, her skills, her professional goals. Not this. "I beg your pardon. Everyone needs something from me," Nathaniel said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, like a blade hidden in velvet. "Money, power, influence. I prefer honesty over pretense. So why are you here?" Clara's first instinct was to craft a polished answer, to say she admired Hale Dynamics, to speak of ambition and growth, to sound impressive. But his eyes, cool and unyielding, seemed to strip away every layer of artifice. Lying to him felt not only pointless, but impossible. So, she told the truth. "My mother has Parkinson's," she said quietly. "The treatments that might slow it down aren't covered by insurance. My father does what he can, but he's tired. I have student loans, and this job pays more than anything else I could find. Without it, my family falls apart." The words trembled, but she forced them steady. "That's why I'm here." Nathaniel regarded her for a long time, expression unreadable. Then he leaned back, fingers still pressed together. "At least you're honest," he said. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Most people waste my time with elaborate fictions about career advancement and mutual benefit. But honesty, Miss Bennett, is rare." "I believe in mutual benefit," Clara said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "You need someone competent and reliable. I need income and insurance. That seems fairly straightforward." "Competent remains to be seen," Nathaniel replied evenly. "As for reliable..." He reached for the single folder on his desk and slid it across the glass surface toward her. "These are the expectations. Read them. Sign if you agree. Leave if you do not." Clara opened the folder. Her eyes skimmed the dense print availability at all hours. Weekends included, absolute confidentiality, no personal calls during work hours, dress code more suited to high-level board meetings than administrative work. It was a contract that demanded not only her time, but her very self. She looked up. "These terms are demanding." "I am demanding," Nathaniel said without apology. His gaze did not waver. Success requires sacrifice. Those unwilling to sacrifice rarely succeed. Clara swallowed. "And what do you sacrifice, Mr. Hale?" For the briefest instant, something unguarded flickered in his eyes. Then, as quickly as it came, it vanished, replaced by the cold professionalism once more. "Everything that does not serve the company," he said. Clara lowered her gaze to the folder, her pulse racing. Her pen felt heavy in her hand. Yet, she signed, the ink gliding across the page like a promise she wasn't sure she should make. When she looked up, Nathaniel's storm-gray eyes were still fixed on her. And though he said nothing more, Clara knew the first battle had already been fought. The contract lay open on the desk like a dare. Thick paper, dense with legal language, each clause designed not only to bind but to test. Clara's eyes skimmed the words again, her pulse drumming steadily in her ears. Availability, 16 hours per day, including weekends, immediate responsiveness to all directives from the CEO, absolute confidentiality regarding all corporate and personal matters. Breach of this clause will result in termination and potential legal action. No personal phone use during working hours. Limited contact outside of work, except by express approval. Dress code professional attire in accordance with board-level representation of Hale dynamics. Failure to adhere may result in disciplinary action. Clara closed her eyes briefly, fighting the sudden urge to laugh. Not the light-hearted kind, but the sort of laughter that comes when exhaustion tips into disbelief. Who lived like this? Who demanded such complete surrender of another person's life? When she looked up, Nathaniel Hale was watching her with the calm intensity of a surgeon observing a patient on the table. No trace of apology lingered in his expression. "These terms are excessive," Clara said at last, her voice low but steady. "They are necessary," Nathaniel replied. His tone was neither defensive nor boastful, simply matter of fact. "This position requires total commitment. Anything less breeds chaos." Clara's fingers tightened on the pen. "Most people work to live, Mr. Hale, not live to work." A shadow passed across his face. "Most people do not lead a company that supports tens of thousands of employees, funds groundbreaking research, and sustains entire communities. Responsibility demands sacrifice." The words rang cold, almost rehearsed. Clara sensed they were not only directed at her, but at himself. A mantra he had repeated so often it had become truth. Inside, a storm raged, 16 hours a day, no personal calls, no margin for the ordinary rhythms of human life. She thought of her mother's trembling hands, the way she struggled to hold a teacup without spilling. She thought of her father, shoulders bowed beneath the quiet weight of worry. She thought of the unpaid hospital bills, the collection notices, the way her parents' pride had dimmed under the constant strain of survival. This contract wasn't a job description. It was a lifeline. But what would it cost her? Her independence, her friendships. The small scraps of normalcy she still clung to. She glanced again at Nathaniel. He sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on her, waiting not with impatience but with the certainty of a man accustomed to people surrendering under his gaze. "You ask for everything," she said softly. "Success requires everything," he answered. The pen trembled between her fingers. "If I sign this, I belong to him. If I walk away, my family sinks." Her chest tightened. She could almost hear her mother's voice, gentle but firm. "Clara, you've always been stronger than you know." Strength, she realized, was not in walking away. Strength was in enduring what terrified her for the sake of those she loved. She lowered her gaze to the final page. The line for her signature waited like an open door. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed the pen to the paper and wrote her name. When she finished, the silence in the office shifted. Nathaniel reached forward, turned the document toward himself, and scanned the signature with the precision of a man inspecting a contract worth billions. "You understand the gravity of what you've agreed to?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said, though her throat felt dry. "I understand." Nathaniel nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "Then you begin today." Clara exhaled, realizing only then that she had been holding her breath. He tapped the folder closed and set it aside, as if it were merely another transaction completed. But for Clara, it was far more than that. It was a vow, a surrender, and a battle cry all at once. "Mrs." Preston appeared at the doorway, as if summoned by some unspoken signal. "Mr. Hale." She signed. Nathaniel said simply, "Mrs." Preston's eyes flicked to Clara, a mixture of pity and respect flashing in them. "Very well. I'll show Miss Bennet to her station." Clara rose from the chair, her legs stiff. She turned once more toward Nathaniel. His storm-gray gaze met hers. Unreadable, unrelenting. "Welcome to Hale Dynamics," he said. The words sounded less like a greeting and more like the opening move in a game she did not yet understand. As she followed Mrs. Preston down the corridor, Clara's thoughts swirled. The ink was still drying on the page, yet she already felt the weight of the chains it represented. And yet, beneath the fear, there was a spark of something else. Resolve. She would not be broken, not by Nathaniel Hale, not by the crushing demands of a contract, not by the shadows of fear. Her family needed her, and she had just promised, with pen and paper, that she would fight for them even if it meant stepping into fire. The first week blurred into a storm of tasks. Clara discovered quickly that working for Nathaniel Hale was not so much a job as it was immersion into another universe, one ruled by precision, silence, and relentless drive. Her desk was positioned just outside his glass-walled office, a vantage point from which she could watch the rhythms of his days. If they could be called rhythms at all, he arrived before dawn, long before the building filled with its army of employees, and he stayed until the city outside had surrendered to night. Meetings lined his calendar in strict 30-minute blocks, each separated by a 5-minute gap. Clara scheduled them, rescheduled them, screened calls, filtered emails, sorted documents. She learned his preferences swiftly: black coffee, never sweetened, drafts of presentations reviewed 3 times before being finalized, phone calls summarized into bullet points, no more than 1 page, which he scanned and discarded. Yet what unsettled her most was not his efficiency, but his neglect of himself. She noted patterns: a protein bar unwrapped at 11, discarded half-eaten, a handful of almonds at 3, coffee, endlessly replenished. She never once saw him pause for a meal. By the second day, she timed his movements like clockwork. Every evening, around 10, he would stand at the window, gaze fixed on the glittering sprawl of Manhattan, hands clasped behind his back. For long minutes he remained there, unmoving, as though the city were both battlefield and prison. Then, without a word, he would turn back to the desk and resume. The perfection of it all, the spotless office, the orderly files, the seamless flow of appointments felt less like discipline and more like armor. And behind that armor, Clara sensed, lay something hollow. She remembered the words he had spoken when she asked what he sacrificed: everything that does not serve the company. Everything. It was on a Thursday afternoon when the first crack appeared. A courier arrived, breathless from the rain outside, carrying a small package marked personal. Surprised? Clara signed for it. She had never once seen Nathaniel receive anything not strictly business-related. She knocked softly on his office door. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window where he stood, hands folded behind his back. Clara stepped inside, the package tucked against her chest. The office felt unusually hushed, the light outside muted by gray clouds. "This was delivered for you," she said, setting it carefully on his desk. "It's marked urgent." His reply came without movement. "Everything is marked urgent. That does not make it true." She almost smiled at the dryness of it, but she did not leave. Instead, she lingered, curiosity tugging at her. Nathaniel turned at last, crossing the room with long, deliberate strides. He took up the package, tore the paper with efficient hands. Inside lay a frame. Clara caught sight of it only in reflection on the glass wall. A photograph, 2 adults and a boy. Younger, with dark hair and storm-gray eyes, unmistakably his. The boy grinned widely, one arm slung around his mother's waist. The father's hand rested proudly on his shoulder. For the first time since she'd met him, Nathaniel's shoulders tensed, his jaw tightened. The mask slipped, just slightly, but enough. Clara froze, uncertain whether to speak or retreat. The air felt fragile, as though one wrong word might shatter it entirely. Nathaniel noticed her gaze in the reflection. In an instant, the photograph was turned face down on the desk. When he looked up, his expression had already hardened, shutters drawn. Was there something else? Miss Bennet. His voice was cool, but beneath it she caught a faint tremor. Anger, or pain, or both. Clara hesitated. "No, sir." She moved toward the door, then stopped. Against her better judgment, words slipped out. Actually, yes. When was the last time you ate a real lunch? Nathaniel blinked. Clearly thrown? I fail to see how that concerns you. You had a protein bar yesterday, coffee for lunch on Tuesday, a few almonds on Monday. I've been here only 5 days, and I've yet to see you eat an actual meal. His eyes narrowed. My nutrition is not part of your job description. Clara folded her arms. Her voice carried no defiance, only genuine concern. Your health affects your performance. Your performance affects this company, and this company pays my salary. So, yes, Mr. Hale, your nutrition is absolutely part of my job description. For a heartbeat, silence. Then, astonishingly, a sound broke at a laugh, low, rusty, as if dragged from deep within him after years of neglect. It startled even him. His mouth curved in something almost like surprise. You're either very brave, he said slowly, or very foolish. Miss Bennet? I'd prefer to think of it as practical, Clara replied, a flicker of warmth softening her tone. There's a good Italian place 2 blocks from here. They deliver. Nathaniel's gaze drifted back to the face-down photograph. When he turned to her again, the sharpness had dulled just a fraction. Order 2 meals, he said quietly. And, Miss Bennet, call me Nathaniel. Clara inclined her head. Yes, Nathaniel. As she left the office, she felt her heart beating too fast, her steps light with something she couldn't name. It wasn't victory, not exactly, but it was a beginning. The first hint that the man behind the fortress of glass and silence was not unbreakable stone, but flesh and blood scarred by something deeper than ambition. For the rest of the afternoon, the photograph remained on his desk, face down. Clara did not ask about it, but she noticed how often Nathaniel's eyes flicked toward it, shadowed with unspoken memory. And she knew the ice had cracked. Friday afternoon arrived with a gray drizzle tapping against the office windows. Clara sat at her desk, staring at the screen of her computer, but not really seeing the words. She had spent the last week cataloging Nathaniel's habits with the precision of a scientist, and the pattern was undeniable: coffee, protein bars, a scattering of nuts, the occasional energy drink. He ran on caffeine and sheer willpower, as though food were a nuisance rather than a necessity. Her mother's words echoed in her memory. Clara, you can't care for anyone else if you let yourself waste away. The body has limits, whether we admit it or not. And Clara couldn't help but think Nathaniel was wasting himself. At 12:45, right on cue, Nathaniel emerged from his office between meetings, his tablet in one hand, his phone pressed to his ear. He gave her a brief nod before striding past. Clara's gaze caught the faint hollow under his eyes. The lines of fatigue etched along his jaw. She felt something tighten in her chest. When he returned, she was ready. A brown paper bag sat on her desk, faint steam curling from its top. Inside waited 2 containers of pasta from the Italian place down the block. She had ordered them while Nathaniel was in his meeting, her heart thumping at her own audacity. The moment he stepped back into his office, she followed, carrying the bag like contraband. Nathaniel glanced up, brows narrowing. Miss Bennet. She set the bag squarely in the middle of his pristine glass desk. Lunch. His eyes flicked from the bag to her face. I did not order lunch. No, she said, folding her arms. I did. The silence stretched. He set down his tablet slowly, as though weighing the gravity of this unexpected rebellion. That was not part of your assignment. It is now, Clara replied. Her tone was calm, not confrontational, but there was steel beneath it. You can't keep running on caffeine and scraps. It isn't sustainable. Nathaniel's lips thinned. You presume to dictate my habits, I presume to do my job, Clara said evenly. And if my job is ensuring you perform at your best, then that includes eating. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Storm gray eyes, unyielding, searching. The kind of look that would have sent most people scrambling to apologize. But Clara stayed rooted, her hands gripping the edge of the desk, her pulse hammering yet her chin high. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. His voice was measured, faintly amused. "You do realize, Miss Bennet, that no one has spoken to me this way in years. Maybe that's the problem," she said softly. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, irritation. She couldn't tell. She reached into the bag, unwrapped the containers, and slid one toward him. "Chicken Alfredo, fresh, still warm. You're welcome." Nathaniel regarded it as though it were a puzzle. He picked up the plastic fork, turned it in his fingers, then set it back down. "I don't eat heavy meals during the day. They slow me down. They keep you alive," Clara countered. The tension in the room sharpened, two wills colliding. Clara's throat felt dry, but she held his gaze, refusing to blink first. And then it happened. Nathaniel's mouth twitched. A low, rough sound escaped him, rusty with disuse. A laugh, short, incredulous, but undeniably real. He shook his head, leaning back as though astonished at himself. "I should fire you for insubordination," he said, though the words carried no weight. "You won't," Clara replied, his brows arched. "No, because deep down, you know I'm right." The laugh came again, softer this time, like a door creaking open after years sealed shut. Nathaniel picked up the fork once more, speared a bite of pasta, and tasted it. His expression did not change, but he continued eating. Clara allowed herself a small smile. She opened the second container and began her own meal, the savory aroma filling the pristine office. For a few quiet minutes, there were no contracts, no meetings, no relentless schedules, just two people sharing food at a desk high above the city. When Nathaniel finally set down his fork, he regarded her with a gaze less sharp than before. "You are unlike anyone I've ever employed." "Is that a compliment?" she asked. "It is an observation." Clara closed her container, wiping her hands with a napkin. "Well, consider this another observation. You might run this company, but you're still human, and humans need to eat." His eyes lingered on her, unreadable yet softened by something unspoken. Noted. As Clara rose to return to her desk, she caught a glimpse of the face-down photograph still resting on the corner of his desk. For just a second, she imagined what it would be like if the boy in the photo could see him now, laughing, however briefly, over pasta in the middle of the workday. The ice was beginning to crack, and Clara, though she didn't quite admit it to herself, felt the chill of that fortress begin to thaw. The following Wednesday, Clara was bent over her desk, organizing a mountain of reports Nathaniel required before his afternoon meetings. Numbers blurred on the page, her pen scratching steadily as she pieced together the puzzle of quarterly projections. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of his demands, the sharp tone of his voice, the endless parade of tasks that seemed designed to test both her patience and endurance. So, when Nathaniel appeared at her desk without warning, she nearly jumped. "Miss Bennet." Clara glanced up, startled. "Yes, Mr. Hale." He held a single envelope between two fingers. The cream paper looked out of place against the sleek steel and glass of the office. "There is a charity gala this Saturday evening," he said, voice as precise as always. "I require an escort." For a moment, she was certain she had misheard. "An escort?" "Yes," he said simply. "Someone who can converse intelligently, handle social interactions, and prevent unnecessary distractions while I fulfill my obligations." Clara blinked, her pen frozen in midair. "And you want me, Mrs. Preston usually attends," Nathaniel replied, his eyes cool, unwavering. "But she has fallen ill. You are the logical replacement." Clara's stomach fluttered with a strange mix of panic and disbelief. "Mr. Hale, with all due respect, I'm not... That is, I don't exactly fit in at events like that." His expression did not change. "The pay is triple overtime. Transportation and attire will be provided. Consider it a professional obligation. Nothing more, nothing more." The words should have steadied her, but instead they unsettled her further. The thought of standing beside him in a room filled with the city's elite, of being scrutinized by eyes accustomed to power and privilege, made her chest tighten. She imagined herself fumbling through conversations, her modest background exposed like a flaw. "Why me?" she asked quietly. For the first time, his gaze softened just a fraction. "Because you are the only person in this building who speaks to me as though I am human." Clara's breath caught. The office seemed to tilt around her, the hum of computers and distant phones fading. For a heartbeat, she saw not the ruthless CEO, but a man weary of masks. Before she could gather a response, Nathaniel set the envelope on her desk. 7 o'clock sharp. "A driver will collect you. That will be all." And with that, he returned to his office, leaving Clara staring at the invitation as though it might burst into flames. The days leading up to Saturday felt unreal. Clara told herself it was just work and assignment. Nothing more, but each time she caught sight of the envelope in her bag, her heart fluttered. She avoided imagining the evening, but her mind betrayed her, conjuring images of crystal chandeliers, glittering gowns, Nathaniel in a tuxedo. On Saturday afternoon, she stood before the mirror in her small apartment, breathless. The gown had arrived hours earlier, delivered in a garment bag so fine she hesitated to touch it. Midnight blue silk spilled over her body like liquid, hugging her curves in ways she had never seen herself before. It was elegant, understated, the kind of dress that spoke of quiet power rather than ostentation. A pair of silver heels, delicate but strong, waited by the bed, a stylist arranged, Nathaniel had said. By the company had swept Clara's dark hair into an intricate updo, tendrils framing her face. Subtle makeup softened the weariness beneath her eyes, accentuating her natural features without concealing them. When she finally stepped back, she barely recognized the reflection staring at her. The woman in the mirror did not look like a secretary from Queens. She looked like someone who belonged in glittering ballrooms, someone who could walk into a room of power brokers and not falter. Clara's throat tightened. She thought of her mother, who would have gasped in delight. Her father, who would have told her she looked like her grandmother on her wedding day. She whispered into the quiet apartment, "Don't laugh if I stumble tonight. Mom?" At precisely 7. A knock came at the door. George, the driver she had met once before, stood waiting in a tailored suit, his kind eyes crinkling with a smile. "Miss Bennett," he said warmly. "Mr. Hale sent me. The car is downstairs." Clara gathered the skirt of her gown and followed, her heart drumming against her ribs. Outside, a sleek black sedan gleamed beneath the streetlight, polished to mirror perfection. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar. On the seat beside her lay a small velvet box. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside rested a delicate diamond necklace, simple yet breathtaking, catching the light with every movement. A folded note sat beneath it, penned in Nathaniel's precise hand. To complete the look, consider it a company asset for the evening. Clara let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Practical, detached, yet somehow considerate in its own way, entirely Nathaniel. She fastened the necklace around her neck, the cool weight settling against her skin like a promise she couldn't name. As the car moved through Manhattan's rain-slick streets, Clara pressed her hand to the window, watching neon lights blur into streaks of color. She thought about the evening ahead, the polished smiles, the endless small talk, the scrutiny she would endure. But somewhere beneath the nerves, there was also curiosity. What would Nathaniel be like outside the fortress of glass and steel? Would he still be the same ruthless man? Or would another version of him emerge in the glittering ballroom? By the time the car slowed before the entrance of the Waldorf Astoria, Clara's pulse was racing. She drew one last steadying breath. Tonight, she would step out of her world and into his. And she had no idea what it might cost her. The Waldorf Astoria glowed like a jeweled beacon against the night sky. Its gilded doors opened to a cascade of chandeliers and polished marble floors that gleamed under the brilliance of crystal light. Valets ushered sleek black cars into place while doormen, white-gloved and precise, welcomed New York's elite. Clara stepped from the car with George's steady hand guiding her. Rain from earlier left the pavement slick, reflecting the golden lights in fractured patterns. Her midnight blue gown shimmered under the lobby's chandeliers, each movement catching the light like ripples on water. The diamond necklace Nathaniel had sent gleamed at her collarbone, understated yet impossible to miss. For a moment, she felt like she had wandered onto the set of a film. Women in gowns worth more than her yearly salary glided past, laughter tinkling like glass. Men in tuxedos spoke in hushed, assured tones, their eyes scanning the room like predators circling familiar territory. Clara's heart thumped, but she kept her chin lifted. Then she saw him. Nathaniel stood near the grand staircase, and for the first time, Clara saw him not as her employer, but as something else entirely. The tuxedo fit him as though tailored by destiny, sharp lines accentuating the breadth of his shoulders, the lean power of his frame. His dark hair was brushed back, his storm-gray eyes cool and focused. But when he turned and saw her, something flickered there, an almost imperceptible pause, as though even he was caught off guard. "Miss Bennet," he said when she approached, his voice lower than usual. "You look—" He hesitated, which startled her more than the words that followed. "You look beautiful." Clara felt warmth creep into her cheeks, but she managed to keep her reply steady. "You clean up rather well yourself." He offered his arm, she took it, and together they entered the ballroom. Inside, the room was alive with music and murmurs. An orchestra played near the stage, their strings weaving through the air like silk. Crystal chandeliers cast patterns of light across the marble, while waiters in black vests carried trays of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. Every corner seemed designed to dazzle, every detail calculated to remind those present of their own importance. Clara felt eyes turn toward her the moment they stepped in. Whispers rippled. Women measured her gown, her hair, the borrowed confidence in her posture. Men glanced curiously, some with amusement, some with interest quickly smothered when they recognized Nathaniel Hale at her side. The scrutiny pressed like a physical weight. Clara swallowed, determined not to falter. Nathaniel guided her smoothly from one circle to the next. He introduced her to investors, philanthropists, politicians. His voice carried the calm assurance of a man accustomed to commanding rooms. Clara, to her own surprise, managed to keep pace, answering politely, asking questions, even earning a few genuine smiles. Still, she could feel the undercurrent curiosity mixed with judgment. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why her? And then, like a shadow slicing through light, came the woman. Clara somehow knew was trouble before Nathaniel even spoke her name. "Veronica," Nathaniel said evenly. Clara turned. Veronica Sterling was stunning in the way only wealth could polish. Platinum blonde hair tumbled in the perfect waves over her shoulders. Her red silk gown clung like molten fire, every movement radiating confidence. Her smile was brilliant, but her eyes were sharp as cut glass. "Nathaniel Hale," Veronica said, her voice rich with amusement. "As I live and breathe, 2 years. Isn't it? Since the Hamptons debacle, 3, Nathaniel corrected, his tone cool, professional. Veronica's gaze slid to Clara, assessing, "And who?" she purred. "Is this lovely creature?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened just slightly. "Veronica Sterling. This is Clara Bennet, my executive assistant." The pause before those last words was imperceptible, but Clara felt it like a pinprick. Veronica's eyes swept over Clara, cataloging everything from the gown to the necklace to the way her hand rested lightly on Nathaniel's arm. Her smile sharpened. "How refreshing. You usually bring Mrs. Preston to these things. She's always so fascinating when she talks about filing systems." The barb was delivered with honey, but the sting was unmistakable. Clara's spine straightened instinctively. She summoned her calm, the kind she used when doctors spoke over her mother in sterile hospital rooms. "Mrs. Preston is unwell, Clara replied smoothly, though I'm sure she'd be flattered to know her efficiency made such an impression. For a fraction of a second, Veronica's smile faltered. Then she laughed, the sound brittle, like glass splintering. Oh, Nathaniel, this one has claws. Nathaniel's hand shifted at Clara's elbow, the gesture both protective and possessive. We should rejoin our table, he said firmly. As they turned away, Clara could feel Veronica's gaze burning into her back, a predator measuring prey. When they sat at their table, Clara released a slow breath. Well, she murmured, she seems charming. Nathaniel's mouth curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. That's one word for her. Clara lifted her champagne flute, more for something to do than from desire to drink. And what word would you choose? His gray eyes met hers, steady and unflinching, dangerous. The word lingered in the air between them, carrying weight Clara could not yet fully understand. And as the orchestra swelled and the glittering ballroom whirled with laughter and whispers, Clara realized she had just stepped into a world where every smile hid an edge and every mask concealed a weapon. The orchestra shifted into a waltz, violins sweeping in graceful arcs across the ballroom. Couples glided onto the dance floor, silk and satin swirling under chandeliers. Nathaniel rose from his chair with quiet command and turned toward Clara. "Dance with me," he said. It wasn't a question, yet there was no arrogance in his tone, only certainty, as if the evening would be incomplete without it. Clara hesitated, her hand tightening around her champagne flute. "Mr. Hale, I should warn you, my skills are basic." A faint curve touched his lips. "I'll lead." He extended his hand. For a heartbeat she hesitated, then set her fingers lightly in his. His palm was warm, firm, grounding. He guided her to the center of the floor, where the swell of music seemed to hush every doubt in her mind. His arm circled her waist, drawing her close, the scent of cedar and something darker smoke, perhaps clinging to him. With his other hand, he lifted hers into the proper position. Then they moved. To her surprise, Clara found herself gliding as though she had done it 100 times. Nathaniel's lead was steady, confident, carrying her through turns and steps with seamless grace. She felt both guided and free, as though he had constructed an invisible framework within which she could breathe. "You dance well," she murmured, unable to keep the note of wonder from her voice. "Mandatory lessons," he replied. "My mother insisted a gentleman should know how to conduct himself on the floor, as well as in the boardroom. Your mother sounds formidable." His jaw tightened. The word was quiet, weighted. Clara felt the shift instantly, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the shadow crossing his expression. She wanted to tread carefully, yet curiosity pulled her forward. "You speak of her in the past tense." Nathaniel's gaze slid past her shoulder, toward some distant memory. "Both my parents were killed in a car accident 10 years ago. Their anniversary dinner, a drunk driver ran a red light." Clara's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." He shook his head once, the movement sharp. Sympathy does not change the facts. But beneath the steel of his voice, Clara heard something else, the brittle edge of grief, sharpened with years of silence. She let the quiet stretch, the music carrying them through another turn. "And the photograph?" she asked softly. For a moment, she thought he might not answer. Then, "It was taken 2 months before they died. I keep it to remind myself." Remind yourself of what his eyes returned to hers, storm gray and unflinching, that everything can be lost, and therefore, everything must be guarded. Clara's chest ached. She wanted to tell him that guarding everything was the same as losing it, but the words lodged in her throat. They danced in silence for a few measures, the music a fragile bridge between them. Then Clara asked, "And Veronica?" She seemed familiar. Nathaniel's grip on her waist tightened slightly, though his steps never faltered. "We were engaged once." Clara blinked. She had not expected the bluntness of the confession. "She saw value in my name, my company, my connections. What she did not see was me. His voice dropped, bitter with memory. She fed confidential information to her father's firm. Industrial espionage disguised as love. The orchestra swelled, and for a moment, Clara felt as though they were caught in a storm of sound, the floor tilting beneath the weight of his admission. She struggled for the right word. Cruel, predictable, Nathaniel corrected. People take what they can. I was naive to think otherwise. Clara's hand pressed more firmly against his shoulder, steadying both of them. Not everyone is like that. He looked down at her then, his expression unreadable. You believe that I have to? Clara said quietly. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? For the first time that evening, something shifted in his eyes. The ice thinned, revealing a flicker of exhaustion, of loneliness, of a man who had built a fortress only to realize it was also a prison. I hate this world, Nathaniel admitted suddenly, his voice low, almost raw. These rooms full of masks, of people who smile as they calculate what they can take. I despise every second of it. Then why do you stay? Because I am bound to it. Because thousands depend on Hale dynamics. Because walking away would be betrayal. He exhaled sharply, as though the weight pressed against his chest. I cannot afford the luxury of desire. Miss Bennet. Only duty. Her heart twisted. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that duty and desire did not have to be enemies. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not arrogance, but isolation. A man who had given everything to a company until nothing was left for himself. The orchestra slowed, the final notes of the waltz lingering like smoke in the air. Nathaniel eased her to a stop, his hand lingering a moment longer at her waist before retreating. The applause around them was polite, perfunctory, but Clara barely heard it. She stood before him, breath unsteady, realizing she had glimpsed something few ever had: the truth behind the mask. Nathaniel Hale was not invincible. He was profoundly, unbearably alone, and for reasons she did not yet dare name, Clara wanted to reach him. By the time the gala ended, the city had surrendered to rain. Sheets of water slid down the Waldorf's grand windows, turning the glittering skyline into blurred strokes of gray and gold. Outside, valets hurried under umbrellas, their polished shoes splashing through puddles as they escorted New York's elite to waiting cars. Clara followed Nathaniel through the marble lobby, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The buzz of champagne, music, and whispered judgment clung to her, but the night air felt like release. She tilted her face upward, inhaling the scent of rain on concrete. George held the car door open. Nathaniel guided her inside, his hand steady at the small of her back. The door closed with a muted thud, and suddenly the world outside became a wash of rain against glass. For a long moment, neither spoke. The car eased into traffic, wipers dragging rhythmically across the windshield. Clara folded her hands in her lap, feeling the pulse of her own heartbeat, steady but insistent. "You handled yourself well tonight," Nathaniel said at last, his voice quieter than usual. Clara gave a small laugh, though her nerves still hummed. "I survived. That's something." "You did more than survive," he said. His gaze was fixed on the rain-streaked window, but there was a softness in his tone she had never heard before. "You fit." The word startled her. Fit. As though you belonged there, among them. He turned then, gray eyes settling on her. "Even when they tried to measure you, you did not shrink. That is rare." Clara swallowed. Compliments from Nathaniel Hale were rarer than diamonds. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just being myself." A silence fell, heavy but not uncomfortable. The city slid past in blurred streaks of neon and headlights. Clara studied his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tension etched around his mouth, the faint shadow of fatigue beneath his eyes. "Nathaniel," she said softly. He turned his head, surprised at the sound of his name without the formality of Mr. Hale. "You said earlier you hate that world." Clara continued. So, why do you keep putting yourself through it? His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he exhaled, leaning back into the leather seat. Because it's easier to play their game than to admit what I truly fear. Her breath caught. And what do you fear? His voice was quiet, stripped of all its usual precision, losing control, letting someone close enough to matter. The words seemed to thrum in the air between them, louder than the rain. Clara's chest ached at the rawness in them. After my parents, he continued, his eyes fixed on some distant memory. I told myself I wouldn't feel again, that emotions were weaknesses waiting to be exploited. Then Veronica proved me right. She taught me that love is just leverage in disguise. His jaw tightened, but when he looked at Clara again, his expression had changed. The armor was there, but cracked, fragile, and yet, tonight, watching you. His words faltered, rare uncertainty flickering across his face. Watching me, what she asked gently. Watching you stand your ground. Watching you laugh, even in a room full of knives. I realized something terrifying. Her heart hammered. What? That I don't want to be safe anymore. The car was quiet, but for the rain, drumming steady against the roof like a heartbeat. Clara's breath trembled. She saw the truth in his eyes, loneliness, fear, longing all tangled together, slowly, as though drawn by something inevitable. Nathaniel reached out. His fingers brushed against her cheek, tentative, almost reverent. Clara's skin burned where he touched, a shiver running down her spine. "Clara," he whispered, her name carrying the weight of a prayer. And then his lips met hers. The kiss was not commanding, not ruthless like the man she had met in the glass tower. It was hesitant, aching, as though he had forgotten how and was relearning in this fragile moment. Rain pattered against the windows, cocooning them in a world of sound and silence. Clara closed her eyes, letting go of every reason to resist. For once, she allowed herself to stop calculating, stop fearing, stop remembering the imbalance of power between them. She felt only the warmth of his mouth, the way his hand cupped her cheek as though she might vanish. When they parted, foreheads resting together, Clara's breath came unsteady. Nathaniel's eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way that unraveled her completely. "Everything changes now," he said softly. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. But deep inside, she knew he was right. Because with that kiss, the barrier had shattered, and nothing, no contract, no fear, no fortress of glass would ever be the same again. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of Clara's small apartment the next morning, scattering across the wooden floor in pale stripes. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her nightgown, staring at the midnight blue dress that now hung carefully in her closet. The diamond necklace lay on her nightstand, catching the light in little sparks. For a moment, she wondered if she had imagined it all, the gala, the rain, the kiss, but her lips still tingled faintly, and her heart still carried the strange weight of change. "Everything changes now," Nathaniel had whispered. The words echoed as she dressed for work, choosing a soft gray dress that made her feel polished, but not ostentatious. She tied her hair neatly, applied a touch of mascara, and paused to steady herself. Whatever had shifted between them, she would still walk into Hale Dynamics as his secretary, and yet nothing felt the same. When she arrived at the office, Nathaniel was already at his desk. He looked as impeccable as always, charcoal suit, crisp shirt, tie knotted with precision. But when he lifted his gaze and saw her, something flickered, his mouth curved, not into his usual thin line of acknowledgement, but into something warmer, gentler. "Good morning, Clara." The sound of her name in his voice sent a tremor through her. She managed a smile. "Good morning, Nathaniel." The exchange lasted only seconds, but it carried the weight of an unspoken truth. The day unfolded in familiar rhythms, emails, meetings, phone calls, but beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Nathaniel found excuses to come to her desk more often, lingering a little longer than necessary when handing over documents. Their fingers brushed once, twice, enough to make Clara's pulse quicken. At noon, instead of retreating to his office with yet another protein bar, Nathaniel appeared at her desk. "Lunch?" he asked. Clara blinked. "You mean together? Unless you have other plans." His tone was casual, but there was a glint in his eyes she had never seen before. She shook her head quickly. "No, no plans." They ate in his office, the containers from the Italian place spread across his spotless desk. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, jacket undone, speaking more freely than Clara had ever heard. He told her about his childhood in Boston, how his parents had juggled multiple jobs to put him through school, how his mother insisted on music lessons, dance lessons, anything to ensure he grew into more than just a businessman. "I promised her," he said quietly, "that I would build something lasting, something that mattered." Clara studied him, the edges of ruthlessness softening into something more human. "You did," she said. "Hale Dynamics saves lives. That matters." He gave a small, almost self-deprecating smile. "At a cost." The words lingered, heavy with meaning. Clara stirred her pasta, her thoughts tangled. It was easy, sitting across from him like this, to forget the power he wielded, the fortress he usually carried around himself. But when she remembered, fear crept in. What if I'm just another tool, another asset to be managed, like the necklace, like the dress? What if this warmth is temporary, something he uses until it no longer serves him? She pushed the thought down, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You work so hard. Nathaniel, do you ever stop, just to breathe?" He tilted his head, considering, "Not often, not until recently." Her heart skipped. Recently his eyes held hers. "Since you..." The honesty in his tone shook her. She looked away, cheeks burning, afraid that if she held his gaze any longer, she might fall straight through it. Over the next week, a new rhythm began to form. Lunches together became unspoken routine, sometimes Italian, sometimes sushi. Once even sandwiches Clara brought from home. Nathaniel listened with genuine interest when she told stories about her neighborhood, about her father's stubborn pride, about the way her mother's hands still danced over piano keys even when her body betrayed her. "You make it sound like music is in your blood," Nathaniel observed one afternoon. "Maybe," Clara said, smiling faintly. "Mom says life is always easier with a melody." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I haven't listened to music in years." "Why not?" "Because silence is safer." Clara's heart clenched. "You don't have to be safe all the time." He looked at her then. Gray eyes softened, as though her words reached a place long locked away. Perhaps not anymore. In those moments, Clara felt a sweetness she hadn't expected, like glimpsing sunlight through storm clouds. But the sweetness carried a shadow. Each time Nathaniel let her in, she wondered how long before he shut the door again. Each laugh, each soft word, each story he shared felt fragile, temporary, like glass that could shatter with one careless touch. At night, lying awake in her apartment, she replayed the kiss, the lunches, the rare smile that transformed his face. And always the same question haunted her. Am I breaking down his walls? Or am I simply a convenient distraction he will discard when the storm passes? Still, when morning came, she found herself dressing with more care, arriving at the office with a heart that beat faster than it should. Because, fragile as it was, this beginning felt like something she had been waiting for all her life. The first signs of the storm came quietly, rumors whispered in financial papers, subtle shifts in the stock ticker, hushed calls late at night. By the time Hale Dynamics board convened an emergency session, the whispers had become a roar. A rival conglomerate had begun maneuvering for a hostile takeover. The company that had always seemed unshakable was suddenly under siege. Nathaniel responded the only way he knew how, by hardening. Clara saw the change immediately. The warmth that had begun to blossom over late lunches and hesitant confessions vanished, replaced by the cold efficiency of the man she had first met. Meetings stretched into the early hours. His office lights burned long after the city outside had gone dark. He slept on the leather sofa in his office rather than go home. His words to her became clipped, transactional. Reschedule this. Summarize that. Hold my calls. At first, Clara told herself it was temporary, just the pressure of crisis. But as days blurred into weeks, she felt herself pushed further and further from the fragile closeness they had begun to build. On the 10th consecutive night, she watched him pour black coffee into a paper cup at midnight. She finally said, "Nathaniel, you're destroying yourself." He didn't even glance up from his laptop. "I'm saving the company." At what cost, she pressed, her voice trembling with frustration. "You can't work 20 hours a day and expect the company provides jobs for tens of thousands." He cut in sharply. "It funds research, supports communities. My comfort is irrelevant." The words struck like a slap. Clara stood frozen, her chest tight. She wanted to scream that he was wrong, that his health, his humanity, his happiness mattered, that she mattered. But when she looked at him, all she saw was a man encased in ice again, unreachable. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, the ache deepened. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, torn between longing and anger. She had glimpsed another side of him, the man who laughed over pasta, who confessed his fears in the rain. But that man was gone now, swallowed by the ruthless CEO who believed emotions were liabilities. Was it all just an illusion, she wondered? Did I mistake convenience for connection? The memory of their kiss burned in her mind, both a comfort and a torment. She pressed her fingers to her lips, whispering into the dark, "Don't let it be nothing. Please don't let it be nothing." At work, she moved like a ghost through the office, her efficiency untouched, but her spirit heavy. She carried messages, filtered calls, organized his endless meetings. She stood by while he fought for his company with every ounce of his will. But each time he brushed past her without a glance. Each time his voice cut cold and detached. The question pressed harder against her ribs. Does he truly care for me? Or was I only ever a distraction until the next storm came? One evening, long after the rest of the staff had gone home, Clara lingered at her desk. Nathaniel was still inside, hunched over spreadsheets and strategy documents, his tie loosened, but his focus unbroken. She stood, gathering her bag, then hesitated at his door. She wanted to knock, to remind him that he wasn't alone. She wanted to say, "Let me share the weight. You don't have to carry it all yourself." Instead, she whispered into the empty corridor, "Good night, Nathaniel," and turned off the lights as she left. Outside, the city pulsed with life, rain slicking the streets once again. Clara wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her steps heavy. Inside her, the battle raged, love pulling her one way, pride pulling her another. If he truly sees me, if he truly values me, then he has to show it, she thought fiercely. I cannot be just another cog in his machine. I cannot let myself disappear into his world of ice. And yet, despite the resolve, her heart betrayed her. With every step away from the tower of glass, she longed for the man who had kissed her in the rain and whispered that everything had changed. Thursday evening draped the city in slate shadows, the kind that blurred the line between day and night. Hale Dynamics' upper floors still pulsed with light, a beacon against the storm rolling in. Clara stayed late, her desk littered with files she had been asked to prepare for the next morning's board meeting. The building was nearly silent, the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional ding of an elevator the only sounds. Clara rubbed her tired eyes and gathered the reports into neat stacks. She planned to drop them in Nathaniel's office before leaving. As she approached his door, she noticed it was ajar, just enough for light and sound to spill into the hallway. Nathaniel's voice carried through, measured, precise, yet heavier than usual. "We need to stabilize shareholder confidence. They see me as too cold, too mechanical. We need something to humanize my image." Clara froze, the reports pressed to her chest. On the other end, a man's voice, his attorney, she guessed asked. "What do you suggest?" Nathaniel's reply was steady, almost clinical. I have been seeing someone, an employee. She's genuine, relatable. If positioned correctly, the public will respond favorably. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. She leaned closer, unable to stop herself. The lawyer hesitated. Are you saying this relationship is strategic? It is not truly a relationship, Nathaniel said. She has proven useful in boosting internal morale. Extending that usefulness to external perception makes logical sense. Clara's breath hitched. The words struck like shards of glass. Not truly a relationship, useful. Every laugh they had shared, every story, every lingering glance, had it all been calculated. Her fingers trembled, the paper slipping slightly in her grip. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sound. The conversation inside continued, but Clara no longer heard the details. Only the echo of betrayal thundered in her ears. She stepped back, careful not to let the floor creak, and turned away from the office. Her legs carried her swiftly down the hall, past the empty cubicles, past the elevators. By the time she reached the lobby, her vision blurred with tears. Outside, the storm had broken. Rain hammered the pavement, fierce and unrelenting. Clara stepped into it without hesitation, her thin coat no match for the downpour. Water soaked her hair, plastered her dress to her skin, but she didn't care. She walked blindly through the streets, her heart shattering with each step. I was nothing more than a prop, she thought bitterly, a pawn in his game. I let myself believe he saw me, that I mattered, and all along I was just another asset to manage. The memory of their kiss, once so precious, now twisted like a cruel joke. She remembered his hand on her cheek, his whisper, everything changes now. But nothing had changed. Not really. She had only been naive enough to believe it could. By the time she reached her apartment, Clara was soaked through, shivering. She sank onto the couch without even removing her coat, her body heavy with grief. Tears mingled with rain on her cheeks as she whispered into the silence. I thought you were different. But the silence gave no answer. Only the storm outside, raging as fiercely as the one within her. That night, Clara drafted a short email. I will be taking my accumulated sick days to consider my future with Hale Dynamics. She kept it professional, stripped of warmth, every word a shield against further hurt. When she hit send, her chest constricted as though she had severed something vital, and perhaps she had. Saturday morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to echo Clara's heart. She sat curled on her couch, hair still damp from the shower, eyes swollen from a night of restless sleep. The unopened diamond necklace sat on her coffee table like an accusation, its brilliance mocking her foolish hope. A knock rattled her apartment door. Sharp, insistent. Clara froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment she thought about ignoring it, letting the silence answer. But the knock came again, louder, with a sinking certainty. She rose and opened the door. Nathaniel stood there, rain-spattered and unshaven, his usual immaculate composure nowhere in sight. His tie hung loose, his hair damp, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. For once, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO of Hale Dynamics. He looked like a man unraveling. You heard? He said simply. Clara's throat tightened. I heard you plan to use me like a publicity prop. His jaw clenched. It wasn't, don't lie to me. Nathaniel. The words burst out, sharp with fury and pain. I stood there and listened while you reduced everything between us to strategy. Every laugh, every moment, every kiss just another tool for your boardroom. His face twisted, anguish flickering across it. That is not what it meant. Then what did it mean? Her voice broke. Explain to me how not really a relationship is supposed to mean anything else. How telling your lawyer I was useful is anything but exploitation. Nathaniel raked a hand through his hair, a gesture so raw and uncalculated that it startled her. I was protecting you. Clara's breath caught. Protecting me? Yes, he said, his voice rough. If they know what you are to me, if they know I love you, they will destroy you to get to me. The world seemed to still. Rain pattered faintly against the window. The only sound in the silence that followed, "You love me," Clara whispered. His eyes locked on hers, storm gray, stripped of all defenses. More than I ever intended, more than I can afford. And that terrifies me, Clara, because the moment they realize how much you matter, you become their weapon. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but anger warred with longing. So your solution was to deny me, to stand there and let me believe I was nothing but a prop. I thought distance would keep you safe. Nathaniel admitted, his voice cracked, low and desperate. I thought if I convinced them and you that what we had was nothing, no one could use it against me. Against us. Clara shook her head, trembling. You broke my heart to save me. Yes. His answer was immediate, absolute. Because losing you to them would be worse than losing you to anger. If they ever hurt you, Clara, it would destroy me. And I cannot, his voice faltered, raw with emotion. I cannot survive that. She turned away, pressing her hands to her face. Her chest ached with the weight of his words. Part of her wanted to believe him, to collapse into his arms and let the storm end here. But the wound still bled. You don't get to decide for me, she said finally, her voice hoarse. You don't get to use fear as an excuse to treat me like I don't matter. Love isn't protection if it means erasing me. Behind her. Nathaniel's breath hitched. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I know how to win battles, crush rivals, build empires. But to love someone, to trust them enough to let them see me. That is the one fight I've never learned to wage. Clara lowered her hands, turning back to him. His face was unguarded, the weight of his confession etched in every line. For the first time since she had met him, Nathaniel Hale looked utterly human and utterly afraid. She stepped closer, her voice soft but steady. Then maybe the first step is understanding you don't have to fight alone. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening with something he would never show anyone else. I don't deserve you. No, Clara said, her own tears spilling freely now. But you don't get to decide that either. The distance between them hung taut, fragile as glass. Clara's heart thudded with the war inside her trust and fear, love and pride. Nathaniel reached out, his hand trembling as it hovered near hers. Clara. She hesitated, then let his fingers brush hers. The contact was small, tentative, but it carried the weight of everything unsaid. For the first time, Nathaniel wasn't the ruthless CEO or the man behind the fortress of glass. He was just a man, pleading not to lose the one person who saw him. And Clara, though her heart still ached, knew this reckoning was only the beginning. Monday morning dawned with the city humming louder than usual. Rumors had spread like wildfire over the weekend. Hale Dynamics would be holding a global press conference. Speculation ran rampant new acquisitions, aggressive countermeasures against the takeover attempt, perhaps even a merger. Clara sat alone in her apartment, her television tuned to the financial news channel. She hadn't returned to work since that night Nathaniel had come to her door. Their conversation still echoed in her heart, his raw confession, his fear of losing her, his desperate attempt to protect by pushing her away. She didn't know what to believe anymore. The broadcast cut suddenly to the Hale Dynamics headquarters. Cameras flashed as reporters jostled for position in a crowded auditorium. On stage stood a sleek podium with the company's insignia. Behind it, the Hale Dynamics board sat in crisp rows, their expressions a mix of anticipation and unease. And then he appeared, Nathaniel Hale. Every inch the commanding figure, but different somehow. His suit was tailored, his tie perfect, yet the lines around his eyes carried exhaustion, softened by something else. Resolve. He stepped to the podium, his presence instantly silencing the room. Good morning, he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. For 15 years, I have devoted myself to building Hale Dynamics into one of the most successful technology companies in the world. I am proud of what we have achieved together, proud of the jobs created, the innovations launched, the communities supported. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. Cameras clicked furiously. Nathaniel paused, his gray eyes scanning the crowd, then settling directly into the nearest camera, as though speaking not just to shareholders, but to someone far away, someone watching alone in a small apartment. Clara felt her breath catch. But I have also come to realize something, he continued, his voice steady. Success without meaning is nothing more than expensive loneliness. The room fell utterly silent. Even the reporters, poised with pens and recorders, stilled. For years, I believed sacrifice was the cost of greatness. That to build something lasting, I had to give up everything else, family, joy, love. I told myself connection was a weakness, that emotions were liabilities. I wore that belief like armor. And yes, it brought me power, it brought me wealth, but it also brought me emptiness. Clara pressed her hands to her mouth. The words seemed carved from his very soul. Today, I choose differently. Nathaniel's voice rang firm, deliberate, effective immediately. I am stepping down as CEO of Hale Dynamics. The role will pass to our Chief Operating Officer, Jennifer Walsh, whose brilliance and dedication I trust implicitly. I will remain as chairman of the board, but I will no longer allow this company to consume me. A stunned wave rippled through the room. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed wildly, but Nathaniel raised a hand for silence. This decision is not about weakness, he said, his eyes unwavering. It is about strength, the strength to admit that life cannot be measured only in quarterly reports and market shares. The strength to acknowledge that, without love, without connection, all the power in the world is hollow. He let the words linger, then added softly, almost reverently, I will no longer accept expensive loneliness as a substitute for a life truly lived. Clara's vision blurred. She sank onto the couch, tears spilling freely as she clutched a cushion to her chest. The man who once told her that emotions were distractions, who believed happiness was a luxury he couldn't afford, was now declaring before the world that love mattered more than power. The press erupted, shouting questions over each other. Mr. Hale, is this about the takeover bid? Mr. Hale, what do you mean by love? Is there someone specific you're referring to? But Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply stepped back from the podium, his gaze lingering for one heartbeat longer on the camera. On her, Clara believed with her whole being. Then he walked off stage, leaving the world in uproar in her apartment. Clara sat motionless, her tears warm against her skin. She had never imagined Nathaniel Hale, the man of walls and ice, would give up the throne he had built with blood and fire. Yet he had. Not for shareholders, not for strategy, for love. The press conference ended in chaos flashes, questions, speculation flooding the airwaves. But Nathaniel didn't linger to savor the shock he had unleashed. As soon as he stepped away from the podium, he ignored the board members rushing after him, silenced the barrage of phone calls buzzing in his pocket, and gave George a single command. Take me to Clara. The car sped through Manhattan, weaving past traffic. Rain had subsided, leaving the streets glistening under fractured sunlight. Nathaniel sat in the back, his hands clenched into fists, his chest tight with anticipation and dread. He had just given up the role that had defined him for half his life, but none of it mattered if Clara wouldn't open her door. When the car finally pulled up in front of her apartment building, Nathaniel didn't wait for George to escort him. He stepped out, his polished shoes striking the wet pavement, and took the stairs 2 at a time. He knocked once, twice. The pause felt like an eternity. Then the door opened. Clara stood there in a simple sweater and jeans, her hair loosely tied back, her face pale from sleepless nights. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, but her expression remained guarded. Nathaniel, she said softly. Clara. His voice was rough, unsteady in a way she had never heard before. For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them was thick with memory of betrayal, of confessions, of a kiss in the rain that had changed everything. Finally. Clara crossed her arms, as though shielding herself. "What are you doing here? I imagine you've already seen the news," he said. She nodded. "I did." Her voice carried no triumph, only quiet confusion. "You really stepped down?" "Yes." He met her gaze, his storm-gray eyes stripped of all pretense. "Because I couldn't keep choosing power over life. Over love." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of overhearing his words, "not truly a relationship," useful, still cut deep. "You said I was just an employee, that our relationship wasn't real." Nathaniel flinched, the words striking harder than any boardroom ambush. "I said that to protect you, Clara. I thought if I denied you, they wouldn't see you as leverage. But it was a coward's choice, and it hurt you more than I ever intended." Her eyes glistened, though she held her voice steady. "How do I know this isn't just another strategy, another grand gesture to win me back for appearance's sake?" He stepped closer, his hand trembling as it reached for hers, but stopping short. "Because I just gave up the only thing I've ever worshipped, my company. I walked away from everything people said defined me. And I did it not for shareholders, not for headlines, but because I realized it meant nothing if I didn't have you." Clara's heart hammered. She searched his face for cracks, for calculation. What she saw instead was rawness, a man stripped bare, willing to risk everything for truth. "I don't want safety anymore," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking. "I don't want walls. I don't want a life of expensive loneliness. I want you, Clara, with all your stubbornness, your honesty, your fire. I want the way you see me really see me. And I am terrified, because loving you means they can hurt me in ways no rival ever could. But I would rather face that terror than live another day without you." Tears spilled freely down Clara's cheeks. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. For so long, she had doubted. She had feared she was just another cog in his machine, another asset to polish his image. But here he stood, stripped of the very crown he had built, offering her nothing but himself. Slowly, she lowered her hand. "Do you mean it, Nathaniel? Truly?" He nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "With everything I am." The silence that followed was heavy, but no longer suffocating. Clara felt the battle inside her hurt against hope, fear against love, and for the first time, hope began to win. She reached out, taking his hand at last. His fingers closed around hers as though anchoring him to life itself. "Then we try," Clara whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "No more lies, no more walls. If we're going to do this, it has to be with trust." Nathaniel's breath shuddered out. "With trust," he repeated, as if sealing a vow. And then he pulled her into his arms, not with the hungry desperation of possession, but with the reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious. Clara buried her face against his shoulder, her tears wetting his suit, and for the first time in weeks, her heart felt steady. Outside, the city buzzed with speculation, with headlines that would dissect his decision for months to come. But inside that modest apartment, two people stood in the quiet, deciding not on empires or fortunes, but on second chances. 6 months later, autumn sunlight spilled across Central Park, gilding the leaves in shades of amber and gold. The crisp air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart, and laughter of children echoed as they chased one another beneath the trees. On a quiet path, Nathaniel and Clara walked hand in hand. No chauffeur, no board of directors waiting, no cameras trailing their every move, just two people moving at a pace that finally belonged to them. Nathaniel wore a simple wool coat, his tie long abandoned, his expression lighter than Clara had ever seen. The hard edges of the ruthless CEO had softened into something more human, more open. Beside him, Clara carried a leather satchel filled with files, her steps steady with purpose. Their destination wasn't a gleaming tower or a 5-star gala, but a modest office building tucked near the edge of the park, the headquarters of the Hale Foundation for Community Health Innovation. It had started with an idea, a seed planted during their lunches when Clara spoke about her mother's treatments, about the crushing burden of medical bills, about the untapped brilliance of young doctors and researchers who lacked funding. Nathaniel, once consumed by mergers and acquisitions, found himself listening not as a strategist, but as a man awakening to a new vision. And so, he built something new, not an empire this time, but a foundation one that invested in startups creating affordable medical technologies, clinics, and solutions for communities long overlooked. Clara, with her organizational sharpness and quiet determination, became the foundation's director of operations. She thrived in the role, channeling her skills into something tangible, something that changed lives. That morning, they entered the small but bustling office. The walls were decorated not with abstract art or corporate branding, but with photographs of smiling families, community clinics, ribbon cuttings, young entrepreneurs holding prototypes in their hands. Morning, Clara, morning, Nathaniel. Staff members greeted them warmly as they passed. There was no fear in their voices, no stiff deference, only respect, the kind earned not by power, but by trust. Nathaniel paused at a photo on the wall, a rural clinic they had helped fund in Ohio, children grinning as nurses unpacked new diagnostic equipment. His lips curved into a quiet smile. "Sometimes, I still can't believe this is real," he said softly. Clara looked at him, her heart swelling. "You built it, Nathaniel, with your own hands, your own heart, and for once, not at the cost of everything else." He turned to her, eyes warm, no longer storm gray but steady as steel, softened by light. "No," he said, "we built it." Later that evening, they returned to their apartment, a sunlit space with creaky hardwood floors, shelves lined with books, and a small balcony overlooking the city. Far from the penthouses Nathaniel once lived in, it was modest, but it was theirs. Clara curled beside him on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. He held a steaming mug of coffee brewed the way she liked it, something he had finally learned after months of trial and error. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly, repeating the question she had posed once before during a walk in the park. Nathaniel thought for a long moment. He set the mug aside and tilted her chin so she met his gaze. "I regret that it took me so long to see clearly," he admitted, "that I wasted years mistaking control for strength, success for meaning. But beyond that," his thumb brushed her cheek with infinite tenderness. "No, I have no regrets, because losing the crown gave me something far greater." Clara smiled, tears shimmering in her eyes. "And what's that?" "You," he whispered simply, "and a life worth living." Their lips met, not with the urgency of a first kiss, but with the ease of two souls who had finally found home. Outside, the city hummed, but within their quiet apartment, time seemed to hold still. For Nathaniel Hale, once the ruthless billionaire who believed walls were safer than love, true strength had not come from boardrooms or balance sheets. It had come from lowering his guard, from daring to love and be loved in return. And for Clara Bennett, once a secretary desperate to keep her family afloat, she had discovered that her greatest power wasn't just her resilience, but her ability to see beyond the armor, to stand firm without losing compassion. Together, they had rebuilt not just a company or a foundation, but a life one defined not by titles or wealth, but by trust, purpose, and the courage to open their hearts. As twilight deepened and city lights flickered to life, Clara whispered the truth they had both come to know. Power fades, money shifts, but love, the kind we choose, the kind we fight for, that's what endures. Nathaniel kissed her forehead, his voice steady and certain. And that's the only empire worth building, at its heart. This story is not about wealth or power, but about the quiet courage it takes to open our hearts. Nathaniel Hale built walls of steel around himself, believing success was the only shield against loss. Clara Bennett stepped into his world with nothing but determination and compassion, and reminded him that true strength is not found in control, but in connection. For many of us, Life teaches us to protect ourselves. We harden after betrayals. We bury our tenderness under duty, and we convince ourselves that needing others is weakness. Yet, as this story shows, loneliness is the heaviest burden of all. The lesson is simple, but not easy. Love requires risk. To trust someone with our deepest fears, to allow ourselves to be seen in our imperfection, that is where real courage lies. Power may win battles, but only love heals wounds. So, perhaps we, too, should ask, what walls have we built? And are they keeping us safe or keeping us from the life we truly long for? Because in the end, the greatest success is not what we build with our hands, but what we dare to build with our hearts. Thank you so much for spending your time with Shining Stories. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone who might need its message, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. Until next time, may your days be filled with love, hope, and courage.